Hallo miteinander, I'm Gashady6 and this is the Let's Play Bingo. If someone were to ask me, what is your childhood point-and-click adventure game, I would answer Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, followed very closely by The Secret of Monkey Island. I'm by no means the only one in the club there. This game was quite the hit, so much so that fans call it the unofficial Indiana Jones 4 for many years. Then came along Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and revived the saga after so many years. I think the internet will agree with me when I say things should have stayed like they were. And here's our protagonist making a daring break-in. During the prologue of this game, we don't have our scum interface. We can just click on things and Indy will interact as appropriate with them. Oftentimes, not much will happen. Other times, a whole lot will. And that is our first death of the LP. Nah. This game is not made by Sierra. It is not obsessed with murdering you. Granted, there are a handful of game overs you can get, but they're always expected. If your common sense tells you something should kill you, it most likely will. And we have just regained consciousness, so let's resume doing whatever we were doing. The game didn't tell us so far, most purposefully so. We cannot yet pick up this arrowhead over here, but do remember it. You will be returning here and it will become very, very relevant. Now if we pick up this rope, whoops, looks like we'll be seeing stars again. Yeah, I think you can spot a running gag here. Knocked out and the music resumes. It's excellent. Really, the prologue of this game perfectly hits the kind of charm you would expect from Indiana Jones. It's really random at first, but in the end, simply genius. Just generally, I think this game has exactly the kind of humor that it needs for what it wants to be. It is very funny and playful, but it never slips into goofiness or becomes too cheap or raunchy. That can make for some laughs, don't get me wrong, but the game has a serious premise and it never gets in the way of that. It is about finding Atlantis, you know, a pretty monumental undertaking if I've ever heard of one. The overall grand scale of Fate of Atlantis certainly kept me and my sister motivated while playing for many hours. Especially with some of the later, more abstract puzzles, we often got stuck. Even the little hint book we had wasn't always helpful. And here we go again. Yeah, Mr. Doug Lee here, we won't be hearing much from him. For our purposes, I set the game to text only. Kind of like in the old days of this game's floppy disk release. A lot of folks don't like the talkie version very much. I'm okay with it, I'm kind of neutral to it if that's at all possible. But yeah, if you don't like the voices, you can always press Ctrl+T in the Steam version to toggle them on or off. And here it is, the object of our desire. We would endure multiple concussions for this. The world surely must have been waiting for such a priceless artifact, right? Nope, it wasn't. It was collecting dust in the cellar of the Barnett College. So far, our adventure was nothing more than rummaging through junk, a glorified spring cleaning. Well done, Indy, well done. To quickly shove something in between, Fate of Atlantis was my choice for the bingo spot of adventure game. I didn't think I would ever show one of these. Usually my commentary is accompanied by constant explosions and pompous magic. Pretty much anything you would find in an over-the-top, unrealistic scenario. None of that so far. I guess there's a first time for everything. Just needed a little bit of a push from the contest. Getting back on track, Mr. Totally Not an Alias Smith from Anytown, USA here, seems to be interested in doing business with us. This is the thing we just fetched for him. Yes, let's do open it, don't be chicken. You know, back in the day, these close-ups were magical. I know that nowadays the resolution is minuscule, it seems all grainy and all in all motionless, but at its time, 1992, this seemed a lot less artificial than most of what home consoles had to offer. Well, this suddenly turned all sour. This doesn't seem like the most lucrative idea for a theft. What could this crook really be up to? Is he affiliated with someone? Wo ist Fritz? This might give you a clue if you can place the language. Yeah, kick his ass, Indy, go for it! Oh darn it. Well, let's call it a draw, with a slight advantage for us, as you will soon see. Our adventure almost came to a complete halt there, but now we have a lead that tells us that Mr. Smith was German. I think it's the understatement of the century when I tell you my countrymen were not a lot of fun to have around in the late 30s, where this game takes place. So, we have our villains now. It's the same ones Indy faced in Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Last Crusade. Speaking of that, Fate of Atlantis was a sequel. It followed The Last Crusade: The Graphical Adventure. That is also one fine game, kind of overshadowed by Fate of Atlantis though. So much that I first thought I would show it to you instead. Guess what? That decision was taken from me, because as a German, believe it or not, I am not allowed to purchase a digital copy of that game right now, because those are currently only uncensored. In case you don't know about this, by law, video games released in Germany may not contain National Socialist symbolism. So the version that I played as a kid has been adjusted to that. Indy 3 had loads of swastikas in its original form. You know what else did? South Park: The Stick of Truth, just recently. That game caused quite an uproar over here. They fell right into that trap. It had to be banned and taken off the shelves, but later it was redistributed. In its censored form, of course. But still, that really was quite a fiasco. Okay, we have now traveled to New York to find Sophia Hapgood. As we just found out, she's being targeted. You can tell this is where the game starts proper, because we have all of our actions now. Things surely won't be so simple anymore, now that we have to specify everything. We can pick up this newspaper here. We should, because we're going to need it to solve a problem in just a few minutes. Our current problem is a different one. We have to get backstage into Sophia's show. However, this meathead, the bouncer Biff, is in our way. There are multiple ways to get past him. For example, you can sweet talk your way onto his good side and persuade him to let you in. Another option is to just avoid that door and push around the boxes on the right until you can reach the fire ladder. That's for the sneaks among us. It gets you to the same place in the end. But you know what? Those solutions are for pansies. What we're going to do is we're going to resort to some good old 30s style pugilism. Admit it, you wouldn't want it any other way. So, the fighting minigame. You can punch high, medium and low, block high, medium and low, move back or close in. It's all in all pretty simple, but somehow I've never been any good at it. I just flail around wildly, and that usually works best for me. In case you can't stand it, rest assured that almost all fighting in this game is optional. Unless you choose a certain path, more on that later. Well, we're finally in, and there's Sophia. Now in real life, some women can be difficult. Of course, some men can too. But Sophia here, she can open up a portal to a whole new dimension of being difficult. Really, it's astonishing. She is the female lead of the game and will accompany you a good part of the way through. There's even a few instances where she is fully playable. With her being our sidekick on this quest and all, you would think she'd be very loyal and supportive towards Indy. Wrong. Sometimes it's a puzzle in and of itself to get her to agree on a plan with you. As I was saying, she's difficult. Very difficult. But honestly, I've always liked her. She is a great character and very humorous. What I've also always liked was this scene. To 8-year-old me, this slideshow was the coolest thing. I've seen it so many times. What I especially liked was this jet. I always wanted to ride it, but I never could. Childhood memories aside, Sophia's presentation here paints the picture of Atlantis for this game. The developers also didn't just make this shit up. Almost all the lore in this game is rooted in Atlantean mythology. It often references old texts. For example, this bit here, the circular structure of Atlantis. Philosophers have claimed that it is just like that. That part, by the way, is especially relevant to the game, because when you do find Atlantis, it is set up in these 3 concentric rings. Yeah, big spoiler, you find Atlantis. I don't think it constitutes as that. I mean, it's rather along the lines of fulfilled expectations, if you ask me. You know, that I've seen these scenes so often in my youth is kind of strange. Why would you constantly start new games? Because you're strange. But apart from that, the adventure game genre always runs the risk of having very little replay value. Fate of Atlantis was also very smart in that regard. About a quarter of the way through, the path branches. You can choose the puzzly wits path, the action-centric fists path, or finally the team path. Now if that's all a bit too much for you and you only want to play through it once, my recommendation, choose the team path. It is easily the best. Why? Because it has the most Sophia in it, obviously. Now all these cutscenes and general information aside, we still have an objective. We need to get Sophia's attention. Easier said than done though. This stagehand will always blow his whistle if we try anything funny. By picking the right dialogue options though, we can find out some crucial information. He enjoys reading in his spare time. That's really an interesting thing about classic adventure games like this. You have to work for everything. They don't easily communicate what you actually have to do. Spotting little hints like these is really half the fun of it all. Pfft, the Brooklyn Dodgers never win. Actually, I really wouldn't know. I'm from beyond the pond. Well, now that he's out of the way, we can tamper with his equipment. If we push both the left and right levers, the lights will lead you to that solution. Followed by a pixel hunt for this little button, we can entertain the masses with some mad special effects. Now this is really one of the funniest scenes in the entire game. It cracks me up every time. Partially because of an upcoming line, my favorite, deceit! Yeah, I love how it takes Sophia a minute to realize it is indeed Indiana Jones. But it gets better, that's not all of it. Wait for it. Absolutely brilliant. Welp, we just destroyed someone's career for all eternity. Aren't we proud? It'll be in all the tabloids. Following this would be a scene that would advance the story and give us a few more leads. Rather than showing you that, I want to give you a few more examples of puzzles in the early game. That is why we skipped ahead a rough 10 minutes of gameplay from our previous position, and we are now traveling to Central America looking for the eccentric explorer Charles Sternhardt. I've always liked the looks of this place. It's very lush, but also dark and hostile. Just the music is kind of weird. It sounds like someone mixed in random fart noises. Why? Over here we can already spot a huge problem for our ophidiophobic hero. More than in any other game, we are allowed to ask, why did it have to be snakes? So what do we do about it? Not using our whip, that is for certain. If you're playing Fate of Atlantis, you have to lay off such a blunt way of thinking. The key to it all lies here, with this seemingly uninteresting jungle rodent. The first thing we need to do is shy him away towards the right passage, which is the one we just came from, the one in the top center. And once everything is in place, all that is left to do is to whip it. Whip it good. Well, a little bit better than that at least. Come on, controls, don't be picky, don't let me down. Come on. Yes, there we go. How will that help us, you ask? Well, just lay back and watch the spectacle. I always feel so bad about that, but I shouldn't. It's just like Indy says, natural selection. Totally not our fault, nope. Well, that is one puzzle cleared. it was still a pretty easy one overall. Later on in the game, they can get pretty abstract. For example, when you deal with Atlantean devices that you don't even understand at first sight, can be tough. Surprise! Here's Sophia again, in a textbook display of her awesomeness. She has managed to skip all of the trouble we had to go through, and was also much faster than us. That's Sophia for you, always making you feel like a buffoon. Okay, a new screen. There isn't a whole lot going on here. We can look at the parrot, but he's not too relevant right now. So let's just go into the temple. Who's there to stop us? The answer? Him. Meet the already mentioned Dr. Charles Sternhardt. We want to get into that temple and search it, but he won't easily accept that. We must prove ourselves in order to sway him. Now Sternhardt has a whole lot of information for us, but most of it is optional. The only line of dialogue that we have to follow is the one about the temple. If we do so for a long enough time, Sternhardt will give us a test of knowledge. Until we finally do so, I want to go full circle with something. I've already told you about this game's predecessor. It was also meant to have a sequel. It did have 2 of those much later on, but long before, Indiana Jones and the Iron Phoenix was supposed to be made. Unfortunately, it ended up being cancelled. Part of the reason for that was the same German law I already told you about earlier. Now, Iron Phoenix was supposed to be about neo-Nazis trying to resurrect Hitler. Pretty much a storyline that was deemed impossible to censor to the necessary degree. You might be saying, whatever, but Germany was already such a strong market for video games that a limited release ran the risk of making the project a money grave, so it had to be scrapped. You know, we Germans were sensitive about that subject, understandably, but that time we ruined it for everyone. Now here's Sternhardt's test of knowledge. Problem is, we don't know the answer. None of those options were right, and the real puzzle lies within Indy learning the answer. Now even though we're in the middle of nowhere right now and Google on the fly won't be around for another 70 years, we can acquire the answer from this very screen, believe it or not. From this parrot. It's important to know that you have to admit to Sternhardt that you don't know the answer. If you just guess something wrong, you can't ask the parrot about the title. Can parrots in the wild really be that smart? I really doubt it, but Indy says that he looks very smart, so that's good enough for me. Now if we talk to Sternhardt again, the option Hermocrates should be available. Every time I get here though, I'm very tempted to pick another one. You shouldn't, it's wrong, but it always cracks me up every time I see it. The Gluteus Maximus. For anyone who flees at the sight of medical terms, that's a muscle you have in your ass. Sorry, but I'm just so immature. Well, I think this was enough to give you an adequate impression of Fate of Atlantis, so we'll stop here. I'm Geshady6, this was my contribution for the Let's Play Bingo Week 2. I hope you enjoyed despite me having no idea how you properly LP adventure games. Bis bald!